so extensively about it.
The autobiography of a tattoo.
Yeah.
The only thing that I think is human nature is the propensity that humans have for language, that humans talk, and they speak in languages that have grammars, and none of the other animals do that. So, the books are out of my house now. They're all gone. As you can see, there's empty bookshelves everywhere. And of course, since books, as you know, are one of the central kind of objects, both in mind and physically in my life, this is, for me, always a very eerie moment. And the one thing about these shelves, the empty shelves, is that besides they're spooky and ghostly, but the thing is they remind me more than anything of a particular memorial sculpture in Berlin, of all places. And the sculpture is located in East Berlin. It's in a big square, what used to be known as the Opera Square or Opernplatz. And it's just a big cobbled square, lots of formal buildings around it. But in the center near the center of the square, there's this monument or sculpture. But it's an underground sculpture. And so it has a glass over it, and you're walking through the square and you suddenly come upon this window in the floor of the square, and you look down into it, and what you see is a room full of empty bookshelves. They look sort of like these bookshelves, strangely enough. And you look down into the empty bookshelves. This is the spot where in 1933 the Nazis burned books. This was the first great book burning. The Nazis had just taken over, and one of the first things they did was to destroy books, and burn them in the square was an evening event led by Joseph Goebbels, who was the Minister of Propaganda, and there were lots of students who were encouraged to participate in this, and there was a huge bonfire.
Reichsminister Dr. Goebbels spricht zur Jugend.
And there's one line of poetry, there's a little sign that explains this is where the book burning took place in 1933, over 80 years ago. And there's one line of poetry by the German poet Heinrich Heine, and it says, "People who begin by burning books will end by burning people." Everything can happen again, of course. There's no guarantee of moral or social progress. Anything can regress. The Nazi era from 1933 to 45 is one of the prime examples of that. When I'm teaching ethics and philosophy, that's the point I make, that there are no pre-existing moral truths. The people who make moral truths with a small t are us, and we do it through a kind of very long process of discussion. In making moral truths, there's no guarantee. You can slide backwards. It's easy to do. It may be happening in the world this very minute. Great expedition, and then going up the twisty road.
Oh, yeah.
And then coming down the twisty road. And there's a poem about twisty road somewhere in this book. But I remember liking that.
Oh, yeah, we had a great time up there. Usually in the fall.
Yeah, real live action.
Berlin, I can't believe this. You're leaving.
My idea was that it would be a good idea at 75 to have an adventure. And so moving to another place would be an adventure. even though I've lived there half-time for years and years, but this is completely different.
Maybe you should just put the books in storage for a while, just in case.
I decide that I can't stand
Give it a year.
Okay, bye-bye, see you. Thanks for the book. This is this guy, Tony Powers, who runs the special collections at Simon Fraser's. He came by yesterday, and so we signed papers and all that, and I got him to take away a few boxes, but the commercial guy will come by to cart the rest of the boxes off. So there's all of that, and then these, I just took things off the wall, and then all of these pictures have to come off the wall. This is my life as a child. This is in San Francisco, Berkeley. Must be 1959, 1960, something like that. There's Ginsberg and Warren Tallman and me. In a sense, I got my idea of how to be a person from my father. I lived in a house of two people who were married for however many years until she died, 25 years or something like that, where there was never an angry word. There was never really an angry word spoken that you could hear in the house. They didn't argue. Nobody argued. And I was amazed. It wasn't until I got to college that I discovered the normal family life involved sons fighting with their fathers and arguing. In the time I was going to school, I guess they were arguing about dope and sex and rock and roll and long hair and clothes and stuff like that. But apparently it was very typical. And I was quite amazed that this is what went on in families. I had had none of that. So this is how I became a writer story. Every writer has one version of it. I left the house, I got on the bus in Chicago, went down to the Crocs and Brentano's bookstore. I think that was where you had to go to get a book, to buy a book. And there was a pile of Jack Kerouac's on the road, and I bought a copy. Nobody stopped me. I was 16 years old, 15, 16. And I started reading it on the Washington Boulevard or Avenue bus. I decided I would write to Jack Kerouac. There was an address on the verso page of the title page. And so I dutifully packaged my writings together and put a cover on them or staple or something and sent this off to Jack Kerouac, care of his literary agent. And of course the big surprise was about a week or so later, here came a message from Jack Kerouac, a postcard filled corner to corner. There was no room left on the postcard. It was writing on the sides on a typewriter. He had turned it over and typed, and your writing is great, sort of like welcome to the world. I'm sending this on to Allen Ginsberg. The first of the real books that I actually wrote was about British Columbia politics. It was a partisan account of why we shouldn't have right-wing politics in British Columbia. And it was published as a mass market paperback, and it was a fiscal success for our little tiny press. But I've written a whole range of other books. I started out writing books of poetry, essentially, and the very first one I wrote was I was studying with a San Francisco poet named Jack Spicer, and he said to me one day, "Well, why don't you just write the lives of the French symbolist poets?" And of course, I didn't know anything about French symbolist poets at all, and so I made it all up. And then they were poems, actually prose poems. And there was John Cocteau and all of these figures. And it turned out that everything I wrote was true about it. It was just one of those childhood accidents that you have where you get it all right at one point. This is what looks like a mass market paperback in those days. This is a mass market paperback cover. I'd been reading Roland Barthes, French intellectual, who died in 1980, who was gay. And then I had this idea of what would it be like to write a book about this bar that I was spending a lot of time in, a lot of evenings in, sort of through the eyes of Roland Barthes. He just invented semiotics and a whole bunch of sort of these postmodernist disciplines. And so that's what I tried to do with Buddies. And so it was great to imagine being Roland Barthes. It gave you something to do while you were drinking your lonely drink in the bar and waiting around for whatever was going to happen, whatever adventures of the night were being planned for you. I don't provoke hustlers toward violence. I think there's a secret to not provoking people into violence if you can help it. But I have an idea of what guys working in the sex trades' lives are like. And I'm sure I've done a little of it in a previous life. Previous life means age 18 or 19, when one can get away with those things. So I have an idea about them, and I end up liking them as people, and you can't fake that. There's some of them that understand, not consciously but unconsciously, the old poet's line, "You're beautiful because poets make songs about you." That's what makes your beauty. You know, I'm a happy person in this strange sense, cheerful person, but I do have a sense of the world as horrible simultaneously and all the time, both at the global level of people being killed every day for absolutely no reason, and then at the most local level. We do have a lot of studies, at least going back about 30, 40 years now. And the studies of the last 30 years indicate that there's less reading comprehension, less ability to write a sentence, a good sentence, less knowledge about history, geography, civic participation, art. So the only part that I'm interested in and that I'll miss is teaching. And then I say, well, look, all of you have got this machine in your hand. Without question, you've lived your entire life in the midst of one of the most remarkable technological revolutions. You have a machine that gives you more access to information, knowledge, whatever you want to call it, than any previous generation that's walked the face of the earth, except maybe the original foragers. And I notice no difference between you. You don't seem to me to be smarter than the students from 10 years ago before they had the machines, or 25 years ago before they had the machines. I won't say anything nasty about how you may be not as good as the students. I won't say that. I know that'll just ruffle your feathers. But no, not much different. And so it must have something to do with what it is you look for when you're doing this in your hand. I don't know whether the screen has been transplanted into your hand yet as a human organ, but I see you doing this, and I do some of this when I'm reading on one of my machines, but you must be going somewhere, and it must not be to the place that has all of the secrets of the universe, which are now available to you with just flicking hand. It used to be that secret knowledge was hard to find. Now it's right out in the open. It's just that either you don't know or you don't care. So for me, who you are is very much tied to what you know. So I see a link between identity and knowledge, or epistemology, that's just infinite.
You can watch me download a book.
So this is my getting to work routine.
But all these people have paid money to do this, but getting here at 8:30, too much to ask. I take it that all of this stuff that we're talking about has something to do with the individual question, who are you? Since we don't want to be judgmental, but I do, if you're a person who knew the story of how the world works, which in my view is the whole story, the whole human story, is that a better kind of person to be than a person who doesn't? I don't know, have any people in this room read the chapter about identity by Rauhut? Just me? I knew I'd be a lonely person before the morning was out. Hey. Oh boy. It's the start. Oh, you've decided to come at last. We got the word about the bus here. At last. Here's the first question. Great. Okay. It's not too wet. It's a little bit. I'm okay. How are you? How's the game? Is the team doing good? In the reality and knowledge class, the other course that's connected to the ethics course, we talk a lot about that, about the social construction of reality. And so money, of course, the paper dollars or the credit card I have in my pocket, in a sense, is only worth something because everybody agrees it's worth something, and the courts and the police are willing to enforce the agreement that we've made that it is worth something.
Lincoln Chafee's dad just died, so they accidentally voted for him.
Because, this is no insider baseball allowed here. There's a sense in which all of business, all of the capitalist market, is a creation that we've decided to live with.
But if you don't offer them options, what's the point? You have a responsibility to try to find solutions. And so she and I invited 13 activists from British Columbia. Tony, where are you? Tony Pierce was one of them, and Miles Richardson, and who else? Stan Persky, one of the original 13. It's a beautiful car. It's a beautiful car.
We actually drove to
Hey! I thought you were in Germany or...
No, not yet.
This is, today is the day I've taught my last class. Oh, you're retired today.
Did we come in with the idea of a foundation?
Yes.
Yeah, so that we
We're
had.
going to talk about it tonight.
Okay, and then I remembered that somebody very brilliant said, I remember you said, well, I've got 50,000 names on the roller, that's what should I do? And then some said, well, why don't we call it the David Suzuki Foundation? And I remember you resisting, but not very hard.
Well, no, I knew that 25 years later I'd have to still be here. And I'm too old for this sort of stuff.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thanks for a great flight.
For me, Berlin has a lot of power in the sense of, I go there for multiple reasons. And I've been attracted to it for multiple reasons that range from the erotic to the historical. And the historical stuff is very touching. I happen to be a Jew. This was the sort of the center of the Holocaust.
The great question of the Enlightenment, which happens right here in Germany, is there rationality? That is rationality itself an intellectual construction by which we therefore make rules? Question of whether there really is rationality, and if there is, we know there is rationality, that is, there's an invented set of rules or algorithms that people like us have made, and that depend on concepts like facts and evidence-based, and we have a notion of science and all of that, even though all of those are social constructs in a certain sense. That is, I'm not one of those sort of wishy-washy postmodernists who doesn't think there's any reality at all, but I recognize that we have a large role in creating that reality, and that's a sort of perfectly honorable Kantian thought. So the question is, how much does rationality play? How much role should it play in society? And what do we do with those people who have no interest in rationality and have not any kind of education that leads them to be favorable toward rationality? That's the question.